So, hello everybody. Welcome to our today's DSSC Insights Series, and thank you for dialing in. We have today with us three great presentations prepared for you. Unfortunately, we are missing some people from Italy, the Netherlands, Slovenia, and other European countries due to bank holidays. However, as always, we will record the session and you can access it via our LinkedIn page after today. My colleagues maybe can share the link in the chat. And yeah, also we are, like, as an organizational point, before I introduce our speakers today, we received many requests about setting up a DSSC newsletter, and we are there now. And in case you would still like to use the chance to sign up, please do so on our website. I think the next one is going out in a few days. And now I would like to welcome our speakers, who is Clara Pezuela from Flyware and Sophie Mesaros from Open and Agile Smart Cities, who will give an overview on the data space for smart and sustainable cities and communities. And also we have with us today Ana García from BDBA, who will guide us through different means of how to engage with the DSSC, like how the DSSC community and you can interact. And then also Boris Otto, to whom I would like to give the word now for an introduction on the value of data. Please, over to you, Boris.
Yes, very good. Thank you very much, Franziska. Let me just try to share the slides with you. Just a second. It's the green button in the middle. That's usually easy to find. Very good. Now you should somehow be able to see my slides, I believe. Let me just present them.
Correct.
Okay, very good. So, okay, right. Yeah, actually, it's my pleasure, to be honest, to be here again. And despite the fact that we have a couple of European countries a bank holiday, have the opportunity once more to speak in front of our data space community. And last time we spoke a little bit about the value of data spaces, and that is, of course, very close to the question that we would like to take up today, which deals with the question of what kind of value data itself then has. So we have learned that data spaces bring value, in particular if different parties of a community come together, joining forces, bringing something to the table in order to gain something. And that happens through data. So data spaces are a form of collaboration of different players in an ecosystem on data. And we also need to understand how value is then created from that data. Because otherwise, obviously, of course, also the data space itself would have no benefit to the participants. And that is the reason why we today jump a little bit into more, let's say, the detailed view. As I said, moving from the value of data spaces as such to the value of data itself. And that brings me to my first view graph that I would like to show with you. As always, I try to stay brief in, let's say, my presentation. The value of data is closely also related to the role that data plays today in the enterprise. But also moreover in, let's say, economies or even societies. And of course, we can identify a couple of, let's say, important aspects which data conveys today. But we try to group them into four main groups, let's call it like that. And in the first place, data has evolved into an economic resource. So it's something where, let's say, entire economic areas like the single European market or also individual member states have understood that data plays a role for, let's say, societal prosperity and, let's say, for the greater good to a certain extent. And that is also the reason why both the European Commission, but also a number of member states have recently come up with data strategies. Because in particular, at latest in the pandemic, we have seen that the use of data of different individuals, of course, can create value for the society. We can use it for the greater good. But however, of course, we need to be able to protect the interest of the individual data provider, but also of the data consumer. Then, a couple of years ago, first activities emerged around data monetization in ecosystems, and a couple of, let's say, individual platform endeavors have been started in order to sell data. This is an interesting stream because it's, I would say, probably people would have a, let's say, combined or mixed view on it, because in some cases it works. For example, if I'm a telecommunications service provider, and I anonymize the let's say the floating customer data, so to say, so from the users of my cell phone services, and then basically offer them to, for example, public transport agencies or the public road maintenance service provider, then I can just sell this information for them to better plan when to do construction sites, for example, on the motorway, something like that. And that's happening, right? So there are companies that actually sell data. Then, of course, the question is relevant. What is meant by data? Is it the individual data record, or is it, let's say, a rather huge amount of data? And sometimes in the example that I've chosen, in fact, also simply the raw data, the anonymized raw data is being sold. But of course, we can also imagine that this is, let's say, analyzed, pre-processed, and so that's basically also, let's say, used to address a certain business need already. However, in particular in the industrial domain, Industry 4.0, many of these promises have not been fulfilled so far. So my personal opinion is that this was mainly due to the fact that these endeavors mainly stemmed from, let's say, individual players in the market, and they were all lacking, let's say, the scale-up potential. Then data is also an enabler of digital business models, which is also interesting for in particular European companies, which have their roots usually in, let's say, production technology often, or let's say at least in offering and or developing, manufacturing and offering then a tangible product. And these kind of products have in the past since long been extended, or let's say, well, yeah, extended through traditional services. For example, think of maintenance services in the elevator industry, or power by the hour business models in, let's say, for aircraft engine manufacturers. Those are the typical examples that have been floating around also in the scientific literature for quite some time. And these kind of, let's say, high product service systems, so the bundles of physical products with a service, have now been, let's say, also extended or expanded by digital services, so that we basically see, well, in fact, digital business models and data from various sources, so internal sources, but also other business partner data, and also context information would then end up as a traditional as a digital business model. What is often forgotten is also that data is a source of, let's say, optimizing the business as we have it. So traditional business process optimization, and also I said that last time that in fact Catena X is one of the prominent data space initiatives these days is mainly a cost sharing, and in that sense also a cost reduction case, right? So that is not so attractive of, let's say, we will end up all in the El Dorado of the data economy, but it's really pretty much down to earth, but it's very solid. So it's a very solid business case. Right, and what we also have to understand, and I think I showed this view graph also in one of the last occasions, is that in order for data to unfold this value, we need to basically understand the value chain that is basically consisting of, let's say, the creation of the data, the collecting of the data, until, in our case, the sharing, because then the value gets multiplied, because it's not only used by one company or by one player in the market, but by many. And then it's going to be used through, for example, data science and analytics technologies. And the value of the data can only, as I said, unfold if we understand this kind of, let's say, set of activities. In fact, sometimes it's a closed loop circle, one must say, that transforms, in fact, the raw data into something which is then context dependent, what we usually call information, out of which we then can basically derive actions, which lead to as I said, an improved business process or a business innovation or a product innovation. In fact, what we also see is that along this this value chain, we have to interact between different companies mainly, because in the majority of cases, no single entity oversees the entire value chain activities, nor has one entity alone all the data that is needed in order to create the value that we've seen in the slide earlier on. Right, and data spaces play an important role, because they not only provide a means to make data sources accessible to a broader community of users, but they also are a means to reuse and jointly use the data. And I said that last time, that this is also different to just exchanging data, where just basically transfer a certain message or data set to a third party and then basically do not care any longer what happens with that. But data spaces are a means to jointly using the data. That's in my point of view very important, because also that brings about new requirements when we talk about privacy and also policy management, usage control for the use of the data. Yeah, and if we then look a little bit deeper into what's really happening in these kind of activities, we have to understand, as I mentioned also earlier on, how to turn data into impact. And I was thinking a couple of times whether to include this view graph here in this talk, because this is very fundamental thinking, right? I mean, we have been aware of this kind of transformation from data to information and then to knowledge since long. However, I found this view graph quite useful. It was prepared by a former PhD student of mine, and Enrique. She tried to basically bring together different perspectives on this very fundamental chain. So we have usually we start with signs and symbols, and I don't want to make this a longer story than necessary, which are then, let's call it, assembled or composed to data in the second step. And if we put this data into context, then it becomes information. However, and that was basically what she said, it's nice to have information, but we also need to know what to do with it. That should basically then, through a pragmatic filter, so I need to know what to do with the information, become some sort of prescriptive information, let's call it like that. And that allows us to, let's say, generate decisions either for a human being or also for a machine, a robot, for example, which basically has come to a decision based on federated ML scenarios, which then provides an action, for example, in order to make a turn to the left in order not to crash into the grandma that is about to cross the street, right, for example. And that basically then has real impact. So we need to also understand that, let's say, in order to come from, let's say, the science to data field, we probably have a perceptual filter. So that means we somehow need to perceive our environment. And this holds true for human beings as well, in the same way as for machines. And then we have a conceptual filter, as I said, that puts, let's say, the data into context. And it is also the reason why knowledge graphs and semantic technologies are so important, because they carry the meaning of things, right? However, then the third step is the most difficult one. So once I have understood, let's say, the meaning of things, then I also need to, bring it into an actionable form. And the little example here down in the blue line says, okay, the signs and symbols is something that we agree upon, like the ASCII set, for example, right? So I can just have the number 1 or the euro sign or a percentage sign, and data would be okay. Let's say the euro conversion rate, for example, went down by 10%. That is something that I need to interpret as, okay, obviously the euro is falling, for example, against a dollar or something, and that might end up, let's say, in a prescription saying, okay, obviously I have to get rid of a couple of euros, for example, right? Of course, this is a bit artificial, but in general, we need to understand that, let's say, this transformation, this, let's say, information production chain exists, and we also need always to be aware of what kind of, let's say, role we play in this fundamental information production process, right? Am I the one who just delivers the data and then basically is not involved anymore? That is something that we see in many cases in the mobility data space in Germany, for example, where large car companies who run, let's say, large fleets of cars provide, for example, data from their sensors on, let's say, infrastructures of streets, and basically say, yes, okay, I just provided here, and then I want to have at least this amount of money against in return, but they don't really care what let's say others do with that, right? So, and then on the other hand, I have, let's say, data consumers that want to transform the data into not only information but also action, and usually they need to be connected with the data sources, right? So we need to understand this thing, this fundamental process, and also we need to understand how to model that. And that is also interesting because this is also a very, very old view graph. I think it's 20 years old, from a paper which basically originated from, let's say, this group around Richard Wang. I'm not sure who have heard already of him. He is one of the guys who basically made the first approaches about, let's say, defining, conceptualizing, and managing quality of data at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology back in the 90s. And he said, well, okay, it's important that we understand this information production process. And he came up also with this very basic notation in order to just make transparent and design these kind of information product processes. And this is taken from a healthcare example where it's basically different raw data. This is abbreviated with RD here on the left-hand side, go into, let's say, component data, as he called it, so aggregates of certain raw data elements, which then end up in an information product, which is, where is it? I think it's, I believe here, this patient record, for example, right? And interestingly, though, is that we are still lacking of, let's say, modern or easy to use notation schemes. I am personally convinced that we need that in order to model this kind of what I just said, information production processes, not only, let's say, in just a simple example as here from one hospital, but in data spaces, in data ecosystems. And if we are honest to ourselves, we must, let's say, conclude that this does not really exist, at least not, let's say, on a widespread and adopted basis. So that is something that we need to do all together. In particular, it's a research task as well. So, well, then also, if we know that, we then need to understand what kind of activities turn data into information and then also into action. And in doing so, adding value along the chain. It's a value creation, an added value process. And we can identify a couple of, let's say, or a variety of different things. So data is created somehow by humans, but more importantly by machines, smartphones, cars, whatever. We collect the data, we sometimes pre-process it in order to aggregate it at the source, for example, or make it, let's say, readable through APIs. We store it in a federated way, usually in data spaces. Then we do edit it, maintain it, change it, enrich it, sometimes by human beings, but also by machines. Sometimes we intentionally dilute it. For example, if we just anonymize personal data records. So we basically reduce the richness of data. We transform it, we pool it, so we bring it together, we distribute it, and then we use it. And that's also the most important part, because in the use of the data, it creates value, and that happens to just, well, searching, retrieving, querying the data, so getting access to the data by analyzing it. And that is a very, well, tiny little word for, let's say, the entire field, of course, of ML and data analytics. What we often do is we aggregate it, and we talked about that last time, also in the mobility domain, when we did bring different data together. So my own data, then my travel plans, and then the timetables of, let's say, for example, buses and railway operators, and then again combine it with contextual information, like, for example, weather or traffic jams or delays in the timetables and so on and so forth. So we basically bring data together somehow. And this is also interesting because that basically creates in our minds the idea like in discrete manufacturing. So we have different Lego blocks that we put together, and then in the final information product, I still can identify the individual blocks, which is usually not the case. So it's rather more like in process industries. So we put everything into one pot and then we stir it around, and then basically we end up with something new in which I can't identify, let's say, the ingredients in that, well, clear case any longer, right? Well, yeah, and also sometimes we archive data, not so often, and sometimes also we delete data, also not that often. We are, let's say, usually, yeah, people who collect data and keep it. So, and then basically, while we know that, we also need to understand how basically the value of data goods, well, behaves, let's call it like that. And I made this, well, long analogy of, let's say, also the production process of data, of information by the use of raw data, because it's also helpful to think of data as economic goods. And I think that data, of course, through its nature, behaves a bit differently than tangible goods. And that needs to be understood. But if we know that, we can then treat basically data in the same way as we treat tangible goods. The interesting thing, though, is, let's say that, for example, here, with a number of users of data, the value of a certain data set or a record does not diminish, right? And that is different in, let's say, physical assets. So, I mean, if you have to share your, let's say, production plant with somebody else, you basically have half of the value, right? And that's not the case in data, because you can easily, at let's say, minimal marginal cost, reproduces by just copying it. And the person that basically uses the copy has the same value of it as, let's say, the originator, right? The other thing is, let's say that also, where is it here? Yeah, I mean, the second thing here on the upper part, also in contrast to in individual goods, tangible goods, data does not wear off. So there is no, what is it called, depreciation through use or something, right? Because it's in fact, it's the other way around to a certain extent. And so you can basically identify the behavior of data as an economic good, in contrast to physical goods. And the benefit of understanding this is that if we know that, we can just, let's say, come up with methods to also identify the value of the data in a repetitive and, let's say, transparent way. It's also interesting that, let's say, there is no adopted scheme or, well, data accounting or auditing mechanism which considers these kind of things, because they are pretty, to me, they are pretty pretty obvious. And also this has been around for almost 25 years and still holds true, right? If we know that, though, that would make it much more easier to come up with a euro or a dollar figure on, let's say, a certain data set or record, because we just know how data behaves, right? Saying that, that brings me to, I think, one of the final slides that I have with me. If we know how data behaves and how it's processed from raw data to component data to information products, to use the terminology that was invented at the MIT, then still the question remains, well, okay, what do I have to do in order to determine the value of data? And a couple of years, like 10 years ago, I was asking myself this question, and I looked back into, let's say, literature which basically told me about, okay, how do I determine in general the value of economic goods? So also tangible ones. I ended up with this guy here on the right-hand side, and some of you may recognize this picture. This is Karl Marx, who in the 19th century basically elaborated on the value of economic goods, of course, from a different perspective. And he came together with others up with like 3 general approaches. So the first one is the production cost approach. So if you do not know what the stuff is worth that you have in your hands, try to ask yourself how much cost occurred in order to produce it or to get in possession of it, right? So the production cost. So, and this is like, you can either buy stuff, for example, in this case, buying clinical trial data from a pharmaceutical service provider comes at a cost. Or you can ask yourself, well, how much effort did you have in order to produce this data, in particular of a certain level of quality, right? And this is not artificial, this 500,000 euros here. It's basically maintaining supplier master data at a chemical company in Europe. And that basically costed them 500,000 euros per year just to maintain stupid information like addresses and Chamber of Commerce codes for supplier master data in the EMEA region, right? And that is also the reason why these kind of approaches like, oh, we want to have a data for all act or something like that, which was discussed 5 years ago, in particular in Germany, is a nice thing, but it's of course unfair because these guys have the effort and the cost. And you can't basically require from somebody just to make available their data for free if it comes at a cost, right? And that is why we need to come up with data spaces in order to balance this, in order to find mechanisms to, well, negotiate about, let's say, well, the price that has to be paid in order to be able to use someone else's data. Talking about use, that is the second general approach, which basically tries to determine the use value. And this is the most important one, the most interesting one. Where's the money in using this data? So that's usually the question. And one can, for example, come up with these kind of examples. So saving 25,000 euros per year for maintenance, for analyzing manufacturing data from an automotive body shop floor. So you basically take the data that is generated by the welding robots, and then also combine this with, let's say, similar data from a similar production line, which uses the same production machinery, and try to identify patterns under which certain maintenance windows can be postponed or skipped. And that basically allows you to increase the overall equipment efficiency, and that can be calculated into euros. So knowing, okay, I get the electricity consumption data from this robot over a certain period of time ends up in, let's say, saving 25,000 euros. And that is obviously the data, the value of the data that has been used for that, right? Or saving like 10% of development costs by using functional mock-up data and simulation models. This is a concrete case from an automotive first-tier supplier that is not willing to just hand over their functional mock-ups and also the simulation model information to the OEM just because they ask, because they said, okay, look, guys, you have certain business benefits from it, so why should I give you the data for free, right? And then let's say the American approach, let's call it like that, is, yeah, if you have data in your hands and want to know what's the value of it, try to sell it, right? And try if there is a market and see how much people will pay in order to, well, get the data from you. And that, as I said, is happening. Also, as I said, in these examples that I mentioned earlier on, those are real life examples, right? Right, so ending up and concluding a little bit, the role of data spaces when it comes to the value of data is, well, data spaces integrate the data value chain and ecosystems. So they basically are the prerequisite, the foundation in order for, let's say, transforming data into value to make that happen, right? Because we don't want to have, let's say, alternative platform architectures. We want to have this in a fair fashion. Also, in general, it supports and facilitates data sharing, and in that sense, the reuse of the data, and in that sense, let's say, the multiplication of the value of the data. It ensures trust and data sovereignty. It comes up, let's say, with a fair, with a fair balance between, let's say, the data provider's view on the value of data and the, let's say, data consumer's value. It improves the quality of data when sharing, and I will just, at this point in time, just leave it as it is, but also use that to announce perhaps the next topic in our Insight series. And it, as I said, it allows us, the data spaces allow us to leverage the value of the data, so as a bottom line. Right. I hope you found that useful for your, let's say, projects and work. My intention was to, let's say, walk you a little bit through the fundamental, conceptualizations and models which can be used in order to get a grip on this question, how we can determine the value of the data. What we will do also, when did we discuss this? Right, I think the day before yesterday. Take use cases and apply these three approaches on these use cases in order to really put a value, a Euro tag on, let's say, a certain set of information and of data. That's the one thing. And an idea for the next DSSC Insight webinar would be then to follow up further on this kind of logic, and then look into what the quality of the data has to do with this value. Saying that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope I did not consume too much time of this talk and meeting today, and I'm looking forward to the next speakers. I think next one would be Anna, I believe. But first I hand over back to Franziska, right?
Thank you very much, Boris. And yeah, your presentation also related nicely to the topic, the value of data spaces that you presented in February. And for the participants today, in case you've missed that session, you can also revisit the recording and the slides via the link we just posted into the chat. So thank you, Boris. And now I would like to hand over to Ana García, who is leading all stakeholder activities within the DSSC, and she will now guide you through the question how to engage with the DSSC project. So over to you, Ana. Thank you.
Thank you, Franziska. I hope you can hear me well, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you also, Boris. And we really go from your fantastic presentation, really with the key concepts. Now we got to very pragmatic discussions, and I mean, both are needed, and it's very good that we bring this combination. So Franziska already introduced me. I'm from the Big Data Value Association, and I'm part of the DSSC team. So we are going to try to guide you on how to engage and why to engage with the data spaces support centers. And I hope this is useful for you. And please interact in the chat with us and ask questions and comments. So whenever I finish, I can also get back to you. First, let's go to a very simple, I want to start with a lot of simplicity because we are going to go complex and more complex in this presentation. So we are the Data Spaces Support Center, and I define here three major kind of pillars. So definitely we provide, and we will continue providing support. We develop assets to support the development and deployment of data spaces to accelerate it and really forcing out interoperability. But also we are building quite a large network of stakeholders, and we are going to give quite a lot of information about this network of stakeholders as we really are collaborating and doing this with many. But now I bring a few questions to all of us. So yeah, we are talking about to engagement, but why to engage? No? And we have experienced already in our first 6 months of project that people come to us sometimes asking for information, sometimes asking for support, and that's great because that's what we're meaning for. But many people ask for this getting involved, and that's what we are going to discuss today. But I also want to talk about a few things. First, there are many different levels of engagement. So you all, there are like 100 participants today, you all are engaging with us through this webinar. So I have to be very clear, many of the engagement needs that you might have actually can be covered through many of the tools that we are putting in place for webinars, events. You know, we are organizing so many public workshops, and many things can be really done through fantastic activities that are being developed. But of course, there are some stakeholders that really need to engage closely, that really in many activities, co-creating and building new things with us. And those are the ones that I'm going to describe now. But the first point is always what is my level of engagement, what I'm really looking for. Also, this looks like the final slide, and actually will come to the final, but to be very pragmatic, at this very moment, any question you have, we have a very single point of contact, and our colleagues will guide you through, you know, what do I need, guide me in the level of engagement that I need, okay? We also have a form on the website, and we are already running a platform that very soon will help us to accelerate all these tasks. But let's talk now, let's know more about this network of stakeholders. And here, I want you to focus on, okay, what is this network of stakeholders? So stakeholders, we as a Data Spaces Support Center, very actively engage with, and for different reasons that I will show at the moment. And of course, if we engage actively, we expect also active engagement. So this requires really resources from both sides. Let's start with our star group, the community of practice, that is mainly data spaces initiatives and what we call building block implementers. And they are the ones setting up, running, or providing technology for data spaces. It's a very hands-on community, and really they are here to learn from each other, to align and to contribute. And I will show you in a moment who they are at the moment and how this community is evolving. Then we have a second group, that is we call the Strategic Stakeholder Forum, and this is organizations that I will give you more details that have expertise in data spaces, and they are either enablers or influencers, or in many cases even users that will be part of these value chains and ecosystems that Boris was describing before. They have expertise, and they give advice, direction, and also contribute to activities of the Data Spaces Support Center. And again, more details coming up. And then we have initiatives and bodies, because for instance, talking about the standardization bodies or the bodies that we need to collaborate with, mainly for alignment, because I mean, data spaces are constructing part of an holistic picture of other initiatives. And this is mainly to bring requirements or really share knowledge or influence or alignment. And this all together is what we call our network of stakeholders. Let's know a bit more about these three groups. So our community of practice at this very moment, and well, I forgot to say before that this is evolving. So I'm showing you now the view of actually March last month, and this is continuously evolving, and that's of course gives the opportunity for many of you to engage and to be part of these groups. But this is for you to understand these groups as per now. So our community of practice, in the first phase, we focused in engaging the data spaces initiatives of the Digital Europe program, some of the ones on Horizon Europe, in particular in the energy domain. And you see here the group of initiatives, and we have been running many activities with them, monthly meetings, co-creation workshops and meetings, and regular interactions through different colleagues in the DSSC. But this has a future, and we will grow. We are expanding with new data spaces and also building block implementers. We are also working more in building more collaboration among these initiatives. That's also what we present in a moment, and also in providing visibility to this. So this is about the community of practice. Then we go, sorry, I have a colleague here also listening to the webinar. So then the stakeholder forum. And here we have a group, as I said, of key stakeholders with a lot of knowledge. And together with us, they build this, what we call think and do tank. And on one side, as I said, they contribute. On the other side, they give advice and recommendations, or they guide us on how we have to go. You also see the logos and the names of the current members of the stakeholder forum. But I have to say, we are open for new participants. And here we are really looking to have more geographical distribution. So we are looking somehow for ambassadors of the Data Spaces Support Center in different regions and member states. And we really want to keep building link with many different initiatives through these stakeholders or these organizations. Here you see in blue what we are targeting for, so quite a variety of stakeholders. And if you are interested, you think you can be one of these stakeholders and you have resources to dedicate, please, as I said, contact us and we will assess your participation here. Also, we have here, you see very small, this is our network of collaborations and liaisons. This relates to initiatives that they have different levels of engagement with us. And here we have many other European initiatives that we could even consider part of the data space landscape, like Kiosk, like Open Data, like Copernicus, like many others. Then, of course, also on the research side, many projects that are contributing now to data spaces. So they are building, let's say, the components of the future data spaces. But also other type of initiatives like AI initiatives, like the digital innovation hubs or hubs in general, skills initiatives, cloud to edge initiatives, HPC and other infrastructure initiatives. We have connection with many. So for the time being, we have engaged with 70 initiatives. You have all the list in our website. We have established quite a large number of workshops also to know each other, understand each other, and start building foundations for the future. And of course, this will continue growing. So we are also looking at what standardization bodies and organizations we need to engage, national initiatives, policymakers, etc., etc. Also, if you belong to one of these initiatives that is interested in engaging and still we haven't engaged with, you have the email address to contact us. Then I will enter now in the second part, that is to talk about, so up to now we have been collaborating with our network of stakeholders through different mechanisms and for different purposes. Now we have launched already what we call the thematic and the expert groups. Okay, and this is a way to really organize the interactions with our communities. And I will provide quite a lot of more details at the moment, but already you can already visualize that the thematic groups will be more focused on sharing knowledge. So really, okay, let's group the different people in our communities through a specific topic of interest, just to share knowledge. That's quite common when you develop communities. But we are also having a very targeted group of experts to support the co-creation of assets, and in very particularly the co-creation of the blueprint, which is our key asset developed, or the key asset developed by the Data Spaces Support Center. A bit of wordings, and then we go back to the more visual things. So just one slide to say more about the thematic groups. Again, main objective, sharing knowledge, in some cases also co-creating new knowledge. They have a wider scope, so they cover different set of topics, and there is voluntary participation. It doesn't bring explicit obligations. Of course, we want very active participants. And here we have invited the organizations and initiatives being part of our network of stakeholders to join, and there is no criteria for selection. And the content is mainly driven by community need. Complementing these thematic groups, we have these expert groups, and more content and information is coming, that they are quite different. They have a very targeted objective, that is this specification of the building blocks of the blueprint, both on the functional and technical specification level, and more to come. So they are a small group, very targeted group of experts, and they are experts. And they are linked, each expert group is linked to a particular building block, so they have a narrow scope. And also they really need to focus, and we are asking for really a commitment to contribute to the work. Now a bit more elaborating in these two. So for the thematic groups, we are launching 3 thematic groups. You can see already the dates of the kickoffs. We have already agendas for these kickoffs. So one, you see very broad: technology of data spaces, business of data spaces, governance of data spaces. If you want to register or join, First, if you are part of our network of stakeholders, meaning your organization or you represent an initiative that is already part of the network that I presented before, theoretically you should have been invited already, but if not, contact us, because sometimes it takes time until you get the information, and definitely you can be already part of these kickoff meetings. If you are not part of our network of stakeholders and you think you should, also contact us. So first is entering our network of stakeholders. Also, I would like to provide some names of people who are driving these thematic groups within DSSC. We also have what we call champions in the community of practice and the stakeholder forum, but also you might recognize some of the people. And it's great that we have a good combination of organizations driving the discussions. Now let's go to the blueprint and the expert groups. And here I'm not gonna enter in the blueprint itself, so I'm not presenting the blueprint, I'm presenting the expert groups, but somehow you will see information about the blueprint as well. The slides are a bit complex. I will try to simplify as much as possible. This is about the process, how these expert groups will work, also how they will interact with thematic groups. I try to simplify. So in the horizontal axis, you see timing. So, and this actually implies we need to be very committed, because we need to deliver. This just talks about from now until the end of September to deliver the version 0.5 of the blueprint. Of course, this will continue after. And here in the vertical axis, you see, okay, milestones. I'm not going to cover that part, but here you see that we have a certain architecture boards. I will mention that in a moment, and nicely here define the expert groups and then also the interaction with the thematic groups. Here, mainly, I'm showing this for you to show that the expert groups, besides having the role of drafting functional specification, technical specifications, and also drafting relationship with the standards and reference implementations, they will have really interactions with the thematic groups for collection of content and for consultation, and they will interact with a couple of boards that are being created also for holistic perspective and alignment in between the expert groups. So this is everything you need to know about this slide. This is the one also quite complex, but explaining to you what are the expert groups and the different boards that are being defined. So we have set up 9, we say 9.5 because there is one that is split, but okay, it's 9 expert groups linked to the different building blocks of the blueprint. And also we have mapping tasks, because you will see in a moment that we have a combination of internal to DSSC project and external experts in the different expert groups. And we will have these expert groups listed in a moment, but you see one really combining business models and governance, the second one combining legal frameworks and governance as well, a third one that really looks after conceptual models and glossaries, and this is split in 3A and 3B. That we have a fourth expert group that under the part of data interoperability combines domain-specific semantics and application-specific protocols, one in observability, then here one covering the data space connector. Then under the topic of sovereignty trust in the ecosystem, we have expert group on 6 on identity management and trust services, 7 in access and usage policy and enforcement. And then there is an expert group 8, the 9th already was here, that combines at this very moment all the different building blocks under the data value creation. And then there are 2 boards that have been created, one more on the technical side, one more, let's say, covering the non-technical aspects, but very related. So it's really a single board with these 2 sides of the coin that help for alignment of these different. Of course, I'm not going to enter on this, but this is the planning for each of the expert groups. You can see it here. We put as a reference here like events that we have in the middle, 5-Hour Summit, Data Week. But this is just for you to see that each of the expert groups has now, in alignment with the milestones, a very detailed planning. What is the composition of these expert groups? And we are close to finish. So these groups are really very targeted groups, very small. You see, we are targeting 5 people per group, although, you know, it's not, doesn't need to be exactly 5, but to understand the size. We will have a content lead that will moderate the discussion, at least 2 internal people. Internal means people within the project, and then 2 from, let's say, our network of stakeholders, mainly that can come from community of practice, from a stakeholder forum or others. We are giving certain priority to stakeholders that actually are in European Union and also under control of European controls, so to speak. But of course, still there is openness for others. And, you know, this will also evolve, and some of the groups might merge later on or being split, but that's an idea for you. Also here, we give you an idea of the status. So here you see the 9 expert groups, also the boards, or the board split in 2, and where we already have the experts and where we don't have the experts. And of course, in many of them, we are still missing some of the external experts, even when the kickoffs of these meetings are already taking place at this very moment. If you want to engage, here we offer you a channel. You see here an email address. So this task is led, let's say the whole blueprint is led by TNO. So we have our colleague Giro really as a contact point if you are interested. So we are still looking for external experts. So you can email Giro, not me, but him. And or if you know the tasks leaders behind this, you can do it as well. You can always contact the contact at dscc.eu. But also you can participate in the thematic groups. There is no need, I mean, the expert groups are very reduced. And because, as we said, there will be a lot of interactions between the two. Also, there is a workshop planned in Helsinki for the blueprint with some of the members of the community of practice. So, of course, we want to give a lot of transparency to this. And this is my last slide. So you have heard a lot of things. And now I might say, okay, I'm lost. I hope I help a bit, but if not, really contact at dscc.eu. Check the website. We have this information in the website, although the thematics and expert groups are still not populated there. And again, you can use our website. Also, there is a form if you have additional information. And for the rest, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I already see some questions in the Q&A and also in the chat. One, for example, from Mr. O'Neill on the joint position paper. So what is exactly envisioned for this position paper? And is it a position paper with input from all the data spaces with DSSC, or rather individual position papers with individual data spaces with DSSC? So maybe you can take this one.
Yeah, I take that one. Also, I can type answers later on. So actually, these joint position papers, the idea is to build them with in collaboration, to make of the joint papers a tool for collaboration and alignment. And we've been discussing, so it's a joint paper. And we build it mainly with the stakeholder forum, but open to any member of the community of practice to definitely to contribute. So still this information is not so public, so to speak, but just to say we've been discussing for a few weeks what is the topics that we want to address, and we have quite a long list of topics, but we are going to start prioritizing the topic of the user perspective of why data spaces are needed. Because we think is a bit linked what Boris was explaining before, but really bringing completely the user perspective and why what data spaces bring different for what we have had so far in data sharing, and data sharing initiatives and the value that is created. So that's going to be the first topic, but there are many others in the list, like personal data management, intermediaries, and many others that will be addressed in future editions. So I hope I answered. And again, no individual position papers. This is for us a tool to align also in the thinking with others.
So thank you very much. And then there are two other chats, two other questions in the chats, and maybe we can dedicate some minutes in the end, or maybe you can take
now I can
posting the questions into
excellent.
The chat. Great. So then now I would like to welcome Sophie and Clara from the CSA Data Spaces for Smart City, Smart and Sustainable Cities and Communities, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisca. I think you can see my screen right now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm putting in the full mode. So, and we are going to tell you a little bit about this concrete data space for smart and sustainable cities and communities. And I give the floor to Sophie, who is the project coordinator of this data space initiative.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Francesca, as well. And thank you for all the presentations so far. I think they laid out the scene very well for us to come in and explain our work. So I guess as expected, I will introduce the data space for smart and sustainable cities and communities. If you are familiar with us, then you may have seen us as DS4 SSCC already. So we are obviously part of the Data Space Support Center, and the Data Space Support Center offers us the opportunity to connect with relevant data spaces, such as the data space, tourism data spaces, or data space for mobility or skills. And this allows us to align and work together towards an ecosystem which actually responds to each other. But we are also embedded in the Living in You movement. It's a movement which brings together the supply, so the industry, together with the demand side, which is the cities and communities. And this movement serves to enable digital transformation and collaboration across between stakeholders. So as such, we are also thinking about why cities and communities, what's the use of data spaces there? Well, cities and communities are in a position to be both data and service providers, and they are in a position to bring together information. And in an ideal world, it would happen in a very harmonized manner, so they could actually use that information to have improved services and ultimately to improve citizens' lives. However, I'm sure that a lot of us are familiar with the public sector, that there's a lot of silos, and those silos are not necessarily interoperable with each other. So this is where data spaces come in, because data spaces have the ability to bring together information or data from different sources and from different shapes and formats on a local or national or European level. And by organizing the data, it allows for AI and robotic solutions to be trained. And this is where testing and experimentation facilities come in, because they provide an environment to have these solutions developed in a safe and secure environment to finally have, for example, what we often hear about, digital twins. And now the new topic, which is the cityverse, which is another extension of that. So as I explained, the data spaces have this ability to bring together information from different sources. So when we think back about what I just said, that the public sector has these silos that are not necessarily interoperable with each other, it actually has, data spaces have the ability or offer the opportunity to allow cross-domain interaction. So here's an example that, for example, if we were to use the reservations estimations of hotels together with the numbers of airport passengers, then we could stimulate the public transportation. So currently, if we think about what we are doing right now, we are actually in the first phase of a long journey. So we are working on the blueprint together with our partners. And maybe this is a great moment to mention that there are 6 partners in the project. So there is OASC, Eurocities, NL, Fireware, Austrian Institute of Technology, and the Slovenian Commerce of Chambers. So it's also a very diverse set of partners, where we have 1 year to create the blueprint. The blueprint should be delivered together with a roadmap for deployment by the end of September of this year. So there were 12 months for this. That will be followed by a 3-year deployment phase. And the deployment phase is dedicated to realizing the blueprint. So the deployment phase will actually call on 9 to 12 cities to actually be sites of piloting. But this, we don't yet know when will this happen, because there's no information available about this, but this will happen. So how are we actually doing this, and what are our activities? So together with our partners, we actually have raised a community which consists of both the demand and supply side. So we bring together a variety of stakeholders to help us build a blueprint which is inclusive of all European stakeholders and responds to needs. And in doing so, we have done interviews, we have done workshops, we have done surveys with them to define, on the one hand, the non-technical part of the blueprint, which is the governance scheme. On the other hand, the technical part of the blueprint, which is, for example, the catalogue of specifications. And this will actually then come together in a roadmap. For this roadmap, we have also teams dedicated and personnel dedicated to identifying use cases and understanding what are the high priority data sets. And now I would give the word to Clara, who is the lead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I belong to Fiverr. I work in the support center, but I'm also collaborating with this data space on cities and communities for leading the technical blueprint, which is one of the activities that Sophie has just mentioned as a main outcome of the project. So just a brief description about what means this technical blueprint activity in the project is basically split into phases. In the first phase, till the end of March, we have been focused on the catalogue of specifications for the building block. We are relying on the OpenDI framework as a data space for support center is also recommended in the starter kit, and also in the Data Space Business Alliance Technical Convergence document. A particularity of this data space is that technically speaking, we are also relying on minimal interoperable mechanisms, which is a conceptual framework to define the minimal set of criteria that cities and communities should be aligned in order to be interoperable each other. It's a set of mechanisms that are endorsed by different European initiatives and is quite extensive across the different cities and communities in Europe. So with this is the first phase that we have already concluded. And now the project is working in the definition of the reference architecture in order to explain and to describe how all these building blocks and all the specifications and reference implementations are able to work together with some also recipes in order to allow concrete examples about how to use it. So how we came up with this catalog, where initially we made a first desk research from the partners in the consortium. As Sophie said, we are quite multidisciplinary and also coming from different aspects of data spaces domain. So we did a baseline content thanks to this research. Then we conducted more than 10 interviews with experts in the domain, which are basically providers of the cities and communities solutions. And finally, we also conducted a survey for technical answers. We had more than 46 answers coming both from suppliers and from cities in order to allow us to know which standards, specifications, and implementations they were using in their domain. With this information, we released the first version of the catalog by the end of March. So there is in two different formats. One is a full document with all the descriptions, the description of the methodology, all the details about how this catalog has been produced, and also an online catalog that can be found in the website of the project, in where you can navigate through the different building blocks and consult which standards, specifications, and implementations are already available, and even suggest modifications or new standards and specifications that you were missing in the catalog. You can also filter by maturity, for example, and as you will see later on, we can also filter through which minimal interoperable mechanism is each of it. Sorry about that. No. Oh. Sorry. Okay, so in total, we have collected more than 40 standards and specifications and more than 30 reference implementations that you can see here summarized in one table for each of the building blocks that are recommended by the OpenBI framework. So we did also kind of assessment of the degree of adoption of of each of the building block in the domain, in the cities and communities domain. And we realized that the most extended and adopted building blocks in terms of standards and specifications are the ones corresponding to the data models and exchange APIs, but also identity management and trust, as especially because they are following mostly the European regulations at this regards. For other building blocks, you can see that there is still a lot of room for improvement. So one important element that I have mentioned before is that in this domain is quite relevant to get this compliance with this minimal interoperable mechanism. So we did also the exercise to map the different building blocks into this conceptual framework for minimal interoperability. And we were able to map up to 7 out of the 10 minimal interoperable mechanisms. And we hope that with the evolution of the building blocks, we were able to map the overall list of these mechanisms. So which are the next steps that the project is planning before the summer? So we need now to finalize working in the reference architecture to explain how the building blocks will be able to work together in the deployment phase. We have selected 6 use cases, quite representative of the different scenarios that may happen in a city or in a community. And we are going to map to customize this architecture into these 6 use cases and to provide concrete recipes in order to guide the data spaces, these use cases to deploy the architecture and the building blocks in the concrete scenarios. We will as well define the roadmap for the evolution of these building blocks. And of course, we will be aligning the blueprint of the support center as long as it will be available. So now I came back to my colleague, Sophie.
And as I already started off the presentation with saying that we are obviously part of the Data Space Support Center. So amongst providing us with the opportunity to align with other data spaces that do similar work, we also do great efforts to align with what's have already been done to make sure that we move forward in a harmonized manner. So for example, we also are aware of the starter kit and the glossary. We have contributed to the collection of standards and technologies open to data spaces. We are part of the community of practice and the stakeholder forum meetings. We are therefore organized workshops and conferences where we also share and exchange ideas, again, to make sure that we develop the concepts together. We have a relationship manager for the Data Space Support Center with whom we meet on a regular basis to receive information about updates, about any new developments that have been done, for example, regarding the building blocks. And also we support each other with cross communication on social media and our website. So you can also always find our logos on each other websites. If you have any questions regarding any of the presented content, then please raise your hands. Alternatively, you can also always reach out to us on the mentioned email address. And I just want to point to the website that there you are. There we host all the deliverables that we've done so far, so you can read in detail about the catalog of specifications as well as the landscape where the where the data space for smart and sustainable cities and communities sits in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clara, Sophie, for this great insight into your project. And of course, we as the Data Space Support Center also hope that you identify colleagues participating in the different thematic groups, as this knowledge exchange between the data spaces really is at the core of our project's objective. And so that would be indeed also great. And thank you for sharing how the project is developing and progressing. Great. Then we are coming to the end of this of today's session. We have some questions here in the chat, which have been answered already, I think, by Anna mostly. But maybe I can, I can maybe summarize one or two of them, because they might be also of interest for the other participants here today. So one would be whether the DSSC overlaps with the work that is done in the Gaia-X working groups, or whether it's based on the work which is done there. And Anna, maybe as you have answered to Stefan Kessler, you can maybe share your answer also with the others.
Sure. Well, you already somehow give the answer. So we're trying to use as much work as already exists. So the idea is not to overlap, but to utilize work that is produced by Gaia-X and other relevant associations. The way to align in particular with Gaia-X is also through I mentioned before, in the blueprint there are a board that has been defined, in particular the technical architecture board. So this board, so asking the question about Gaia-X in particular, the CTO of Gaia-X will be involved. In the same way, the CTOs of other organizations like IDSA, FIWARE, and BDBA will be also there. And the purpose, among other things, of course, is to align within DSSC and the different expert groups, but also to fully align with activities that are running in this association, and this particular case is Gaia-X. So definitely we are quite aware that there are many things going on out there, and we just want to reduce as much as we can and pursue full alignment, and just maybe, to utilize the power of DSSC to bring all these elements together. And I also mentioned by answering the answer that we are taking as a strong reference the technology convergence document of the Data Spaces Business Alliance. And there was a colleague also asking about the last second version, and yes, there is a second version published for as a discussion document. And I'm trying to find the link. It's also in the social media. So, but I think you can find it in the DSBA website. So that document already was published, I think, 2 days ago.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I see also Boris, you have your hand raised.
Yes,
so please.
yes, Anna explained it perfectly. We should also say that, let's say, in particular, the 4 organizations that form the Data Spaces Business Alliance, the DSBA, were very instrumental in setting up the Data Spaces Support Center. So basically, the Data Spaces Support Center is, so to say, well, a subsequent step of the, let's say, the voluntary intention to align activities, because all of these initiatives, and in particular also the people in these initiatives, know that, well, the value for the European data spaces is multiplying if we join forces. And that is also, as Anna said, why it's so important to use the Data Space Support Center as a forum, as a community, as a platform, even to bring the different, let's say, well, architectural viewpoints together, because we've seen that also from Clara and Sophie, that let's say FIWARE is very instrumental in smart cities, which is great, because there's a long, let's say, well, tradition even to use FIWARE components in smart city data sharing environments. But in order, and that was also stressed by Sophie and Clara, to make that interoperable with other overlapping data spaces, we must really make sure that interoperability of the different, let's say, implementations of the common building blocks is achieved. That is the ultimate task that we all have to address together. But as Anna said, I'm really, really optimistic and positive, because there is a great enthusiasm in the community to do that. And the most important thing is also that everyone I speak to really shares the same goal to bring European data spaces to life. And that's just great. But as Anna said, use also everyone in this call, use the instruments and well, the groups and channels that we propose in order to contribute to this activity and bring yourself in and basically, yes, raise your voice and yeah, collaborate with us. Yeah, because that can only be done if we join forces. Let's face it. Yeah.
I think, thank you very much, Boris. I think these are very nice last sentences for today's webinar. So join forces, and yeah, we are looking forward to meeting you next month at the last Thursday of May here in this round. I thank all the speakers. So special thanks to Sophie and Clara and also Anna and of course Boris for these great presentations today. And I wish you a nice evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.